Welcome to the October Blue Trails Guide webinar. My name is Faye Augustin, and I am an Associate Director for Riverside Land Protection with American River, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to join us as we learn a little bit more how to improve engagement through innovative planning tools. So a couple quick things before we get started with the meat of our webinar today. A couple things on technical support. If for some reason your connection is lost, go ahead and log in again with the unique web link and passcode that was provided to you when you registered with GoToWebinar. Additionally, this webinar, as always, is recorded and will be available for viewing next Tuesday, November 1st at bluetrailsguide.org/blog. And then finally, if you have any follow-up questions or any issues with the webinar that aren't solved by logging off and signing back in, please feel free to send me an email either during the webinar or afterwards, and I can help work through and troubleshoot any issues. Also, as always, you know there's a little bit of a lag between the one webinar slide to another, so please be patient as we move the slides forward. My final piece before I turn it over to our presenter, we really encourage you to ask any and all questions during the webinar. In your GoToWebinar side box, there is a question box that you can go ahead and ask and type in any questions that you might have. You can ask them during the webinar or you can save it until the end. And we'll leave about 5 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer as many questions as we can. And those that are not answered during the webinar will be available on the Blue Trails Guide blog with the recorded webinar on November 1st. So again, you can find a transcript of all questions and answers as well as the recorded webinar next Tuesday, November 1st at bluetrailsguide.org/blog. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter this afternoon. Is Teva Dawson with the Des Moines Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. She leads the area of integrated planning, helping to understand the impact transportation systems have on public health, the environment, and social justice areas. She manages several sustainability projects for MPO, including the staffing of the Walnut Creek Watershed Management Authority and the development of a regional water trails plan. Teva earned a degree in environmental education from Drake University, and she created the first community gardening program in Iowa. With over 15 years of professional leadership in the development of municipal level sustainability, beautification, and recreation policies and practices, Teva brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to everything that she does. So thank you, Teva, for joining us today, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you. This is a pleasure to be here and to kind of recap some of the work we've been doing. So good afternoon, everybody. Again, if you don't know MPOs, our bread and butter work is transportation planning, but we were recently asked to do a water trails plan for the region, and I led that effort. I'm going to talk to you about one sliver of what that entailed, which is just how we engaged the public in this process. So what I'm going to do is just review what our project was about, what we were charged to do by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, do a very quick overview of the variety of things that we did to engage and the public in input and excitement about the project, and then spend more time kind of specifically about kind of media engagement that really is, I think, what got us to have a much wider engagement of the public, and then within that, the use of this real-time polling being text messaging that we found to be very effective. I'll touch on that as well. So the MPO was charged to do a water trails plan for our central Iowa area. If you know anything about Des Moines, you know that it floods, so therefore there are rivers here. The scope is about 150 miles of creeks and rivers that are pretty much within a 20 to 30-minute drive for any citizen of the central Iowa kind of Des Moines area. We were tasked to look at a variety of experiences, not just water trails for paddling or boating, but bird watching, fishing, tubing, places just for experience and play, as well as opportunities for conservation and greenway development. So we hope the plan's pretty comprehensive in its scope and consideration. We finished what we call the existing conditions report, or the state of the rivers report. It's the same thing. That was completed in the last winter, and then we came out with a draft plan in June. We've been seeking feedback throughout the summer on that plan, and then expect to adopt the final master plan in November of this year through our MPO board. And again, we did solicit public input throughout this kind of 18-month planning process. If you look on our website, we have the draft recommendations, the draft plan up there. It's organized a little bit differently. We have what's called 8 booklets. The very first intro booklet is our kind of goals, strategies, and policies, and then the subsequent booklets focus on different rivers, different unique rivers and streams with the same kind of rhythm to them in the outline. So you're welcome to view those. Those are on our website. Again, an overview of then how we came to, I think, not only engage the public for input along the planning process, but as well as we really wanted to make sure this large multi-jurisdictional plan would be ultimately not just filed on the shelf, but would be integrated into the individual government's long-range plans, and that there's sufficient public excitement to ensure that significant dollars are going to be spent in the future for these infrastructure improvements, 150 miles of waterways. You can imagine the sheer number of recommendations that we're coming out with. So we knew we wanted to use the planning process to not only make sure that the plan we're coming out with was reflective of public interest, but that there was significant momentum moving forward to go into implementation. So some things we found were very effective and were just public education programs. We have a number of dams in the area, and we teamed up with our Science Center of Iowa to do kind of the science of dams and dam mitigation. That was well attended, as well as just some field trip kind of things. We had the DNR folks that went and actually pulled fish that were living in our streams, and we had outdoor workshops to kind of show people what's living around them all the time that they never usually get to see, especially those non-game fish. Those were both well received. Really well received, and surprisingly, with history programs. As many communities that have rivers, a lot of times they are born because of their location along the river. Des Moines is at the confluence of 2 major rivers. And so we have a deep history and that most people don't know about. We had over 100 people attend each of the 2 history sessions that we had last winter on a really cold January day. We also went to other large events. We have a large music festival here every summer, and so for the first summer of 2015, we had some public input on direction they wanted to see, and we had this kind of public art project where people could contribute images of what they'd like to see happen along the rivers. We also had this thing where we had a social media kind of opportunity where people could say what they hope to do along the rivers in the future. And that has been well used, and we keep using those images frequently throughout the planning process. I think really key is paddle outings. Getting people out onto these waterways is huge, particularly leaders, stakeholders, folks that you know are influencers. We had so many people who are key decision makers, whether they're city planners or elected officials, who had not once ever been on the river, had any experience with any of these rivers. And it's such a unique thing in our region that you don't know you're in the middle of the city while you're paddling. So that was a huge thing that the DNR was able to help us with boats and such. We also did tours, so getting out of Des Moines and heading out to other cities. We did travel to some other areas looking at their dam mitigation projects, and that was very helpful. Again, not a general public engagement, but definitely key influencers in the region participated in these field trips. We're also lucky in terms of public engagement of having a very dynamic chair of the steering committee. Rick Tollickson is the CEO of a large developer company here. They're the largest builder in the region. And not only is he well thought of and really boosts a lot of the public image, but Rick is asked to speak in a lot of different panels throughout the year for the business community and talking about development issues. And he fell in love with the Water Trails Project and would frequently bring the theme of this volunteer work into a lot of the speaking engagements that he was doing in terms of what people were asking him, what he thought the next big thing was for Des Moines. He often was pointing to our planning process as that key. So really, I think having a business leader, really kind of someone who's an outsider to normal discussions on conservation and recreation around rivers was huge. He had never been paddling, wasn't an angler, has no connection again to these rivers other than he was an avid cyclist and used the trails that are along our rivers. But he quickly became an advocate, understanding the economic benefits of the kind of quality of life improvements that would happen given potential changes. So that's huge, is finding the right extroverted steering committee chair. We also did a series of focus groups at the beginning of our planning process, and we spoke to a lot of different folks. This is kind of not a totally comprehensive list, but a good start on all the different folks that we talked to. And we had hour-long focus groups with them. It's actually, we were lucky we had a graduate student who needed to do a project, and so this focus group and kind of analyzing the information we were getting was part of her study work that we were able to then utilize for our public engagement and really kind of assessing what are going to be things that people are going to want to hold as dear, which is kind of these things that what do you want us to know as we move forward. But just it was a chance to pull out a lot of common concerns, a sense of common challenges, opportunities we may have been missing, and hear from a huge variety of people. And it's very time intensive, but I feel like it was really hit the bedrock of what ended up being key recommendations in our planning process. We did design workshops, so we actually we invited the public and elected officials to come out and start to use markers. So this is not necessarily innovative or new technology, but we literally just printed out ginormous maps. They were sometimes 16-foot long maps of these waterways and put tracing paper on top and just gave people markers and said we had kind of guided questions along the way of recreational opportunities, conservation opportunities, other kind of amenities we should be connecting with, and we got really rich information from them. We not only invited the general public to these design workshops, we had specific invitations that went out to key staff members that we knew that were sort of government officials, whether they were land managers or city planners that would have input. And then we also always asked for introductions to be done by elected officials, which ensured their participation in the design workshop as well. So those were really rich engagement opportunities for us. But I think the biggest thing we were lucky with was that we had excellent media attention throughout this last year and a half. And I want to talk a little bit about how that came to happen. So planners and journalists kind of have some things in common. They seem to both come from a place of wanting to improve their communities, and maybe we all do. They have similar process of kind of testing out kind of concepts and then continuing to refine those concepts in different ways as they see things trending. And you can see that testing happening, kind of further refining happening as op-eds come out. And they tend to like to keep the feet to the fire when it comes to government. And so they really have a sense of what government role should be or could be, and really want to, I think, amplify government efforts. So one thing we know has been super helpful for us is building relationships, not only within this planning process, but we've really developed good relationships with the reporters, editors at the Des Moines Register. And that, even this picture here, is actually the senior editor of the Des Moines Register went on a paddling outing with us. So we didn't have any particular article to pitch or anything, that we wanted to make sure that somehow got written within the next week. We just knew this is an important planning process. The Register folks should get to know these rivers, and what better way than to get them on a paddling outing, and who wouldn't be in love with doing that on their summer afternoon. We also took them on that tour. I mentioned going out and looking at some dam mitigation tours. We invited some of the reporters to come out with us. This was, a full day of being on the road. But immediately within a week, they were writing about dam mitigation projects and whether or not we should in Des Moines be doing the same thing. So one tip is just generally get to know, again, your reporters and the editors personally. Understand, we've got one that we know is an avid cyclist. They like to be outdoors. So get to know their interests, their hobbies. Understand what they publish, again, to know what their specific interests are. And then that should be windows of opportunity, I think, based on your interest, and know what's timely and relevant for them. So I want to talk a little bit about this very effective event that we had called the Dam Debate. And I'm going to kind of walk you through. And this is where we use the Poll Anywhere tool. So I'll talk about that within the context of this event. So a little bit of background. Des Moines has a really big dam in the downtown area. There's a 16-foot drop with this dam. There's a subsequent dam a little bit further downstream, just downstream of downtown Des Moines. So the big question is, in a water trails plan, we had to consider what's going to happen with the downtown dams. This is not really a question that's been posed to the Metro in any sort of planning process. But we had David Hurd, who was a very well-known leader in the community, and did an op-ed in 2014 encouraging the community to really consider what happens for the downtown dams. And just a little over a year after that, David passed away. And then really, again, shortly after his passing, really kind of the same timing, we released our existing conditions report of the state of the rivers. And the Register picked up on the two and connected the two. So they remembered in his editorial and just a little over a year before that. And then part of kind of honoring David's kind of contribution to our community, the Register wrote an editorial calling for time is now for us to look at dam mitigation, and that really there's a dam debate that's expected to grow since we were starting this project. So we know the Register also, if you've not seen this photograph, this is one that hit the national news several years ago when they were building that bridge that you saw over that dam. There was a woman, this woman actually was saved when her motorboat went over there. Her husband was not. But this became a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph for the Des Moines Register. At the same time, they were hosting the caucuses Give a Damn Des Moines thing. We thought about them winning that Pulitzer Prize, as well as their Give a Damn debates they were holding for the community. They're kind of hosting these community events, and thought, why not pitch an idea to them? So we happened to be having an editorial meeting with their board, and it was on kind of watersheds, a whole different subject matter. And at the very end of the meeting, I pulled the senior editor aside, this is Amelie Nash, and said, hey, we saw your guys' recent editorial calling for kind of honoring David Hurd's memory by having the community consider what the fate of the dams, and we'd like to take you up on that idea of this consideration and have you guys host some sort of community event to help us talk about what should happen with the downtown dams. They were in for it. They said yes. So here comes, just a few months later, the dam debate that the Register officially was hosting and convening this conversation. So prior to the event actually happening, we had two articles, one that was written by a reporter investigating this possibility, and one was written as an op-ed. So again, we engaged several different levels, and here's 2 different articles back to back right prior to this actual dam debate happening. The Register also, as you can see in the URL, hosted an online forum for people to participate in a survey, which we had, I can't remember, I think it was a couple hundred people participated in their survey online. But the actual dam debate itself was participated by a couple hundred people in person. It was a remarkable turnout. The Register was very pleased. They really want to start to see themselves as kind of conveners of community conversations, and this kind of post the Des Moines caucuses or the Iowa caucuses was the next kind of big thing for them to be able to do. So we're very excited about this. And again, here's Rick Tolkson, our chair, on the left, and then their editorial manager, Lynn Hicks, who was the MC for the dam debate. Again, this is where we introduced this new tool that we absolutely loved. It's called Poll Everywhere. This is a tool that is accessible for anyone through online and actually get integrated into your PowerPoint presentation. I can't remember the price structure, but it's something you certainly could look into. It should be free up until a certain number of users. We knew we were going to cap out over 200 people, and so we did have to pay for the use of it. So what it does is allows people from their phones. It doesn't have to be a smartphone. It can just be, you just have to be able to text on it. So we had people text to it, the dam debate, and then they text this number. Once they're in, you can see how on the left there's a confirmation that they're in. And on the right is what it looks like on your smartphone. So you have to kind of choose A, B, C, or D as you're moving through this is one type of question option. So what we did in the dam debate is we had first some practice run questions to get people oriented to the Poll Everywhere tool. And then we went through and talked about potential options for what could happen in downtown Des Moines. So we looked at both channel conditions, whether people wanted whitewater or lazy river or nothing changed at all, more fishing enhancements. And then we also gave them options for what the edge treatment would be like. Was it naturalized or more formal with concrete? So we had a landscape architect who kind of walked through different visuals and had different types of treatments that could happen. And then we had a polling question come up, and it's instantaneous. So the MC here, Lynn from the Register, people voted on do they, whatever kind of experience that they want or what they'd most likely do in that location. They'd punch in their letter, and immediately it shows up, and you can actually, as you're watching it on through the PowerPoint presentation, those numbers are changing until people kind of start to finalize all of their voting. And so you're able to interpret the real-time results. So tips on this, if you have never used it, is start with practice questions, have filler between questions so they can start up. The polling, as always true, is only as good as your questions, and make sure you've got someone prepared to moderate it. Went so well, they wanted us to know if we wanted to do something else, and we said for sure. So we did host a dam debate part 2. That was more, again, another article in the paper, as well as this panel is how we did it this time, the panel just answering frequently asked questions. Again, the Register hosted this, promoted it, and we had, I think, a really good turnout for that as well. That is a very quick overview of the variety of things that we've done. A number of the resources that I've referred to and also results are on our website. I'm happy to follow up and talk more about them either in our questions now or anytime you guys have, you can feel free to give me a call.
Great. Thank you so much, Teva, for that really fantastic overview of the really impressive amount of community engagement work that you guys did as a part of your water trail process. So as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the webinar, we've got about 5 minutes for questions. And we've had a few populate in the question box, but if you've been saving your question, feel free to go ahead and type it in now. But we'll get started, Teva, with a few questions that have come up. So one of the questions is, how many people and how did you network to the community for your paddling events that you had? Did you start working with the newspaper at that point, or are there other ways that you reached out to the community?
We tried it a couple of different ways. We did offer it just as a public outing, and the problem is you're always limited by the number of boats, and so we were able to use the DNR. You know, they were able to kind of host us in terms of providing canoes and kind of expert paddlers for safety reasons, and so we were limited by the number of boats that they could provide. And so generally because the MPO works with a lot of different government jurisdictions already, we would offer up the free access to boats to our elected officials and to staff. And that's primarily how we would work the paddling outings. Last summer we did offer up some history-specific paddling outings that were both available by paddling and by a pontoon ride. And the pontoon ride sold out. I mean, the registrations filled up very quickly, and we really wish we could have done that a lot more. But again, you're limited by space and size. But I would say when you have limited resources like number of boats, number of times that you can tax volunteers like the DNR to host you, I would really target it towards elected officials, government staff, and any other kind of influencers, business leaders, and really just do one-on-one RSVPs with them. You can invite the general public to join you for those if you wanted to, but I really think the intimacy of just having 8 to 15 people on a paddle is really useful.
Great, thanks, Teva. The second question is, you had a number of different ways that you engaged your local community. What did you feel was the most successful way that you got the community involved with the water trail planning?
Well, it really depends. I mean, I do feel like some people might not think about those media relations as successful engagement, but we've definitely been the buzz for the last year and a half, and that has been to the help of significant coverage by the Register. I'd say in addition to that, those focus groups were really important. Again, they were no more than 10 to 12 people at a time, but we did over 20 of them, and that really made sure that people who had potential angst about the project felt like they had a chance to have input and were very much listened to. So we knew, like, the rowers had a lot of concern about potential dam mitigation. So we had much more intimate conversations within those focus groups. But then I do think when it came to actual planning and starting to put things on a map, we would not have been able to do the job we did if it wasn't for those design workshops and really having people come out and just start putting markers on maps. So that, I think, is a really low-tech but very important thing. But again, and we had a surprising amount of people who showed up for that.
Great. We probably have time for one more question. And as I mentioned earlier, the questions that did not get a chance to get answered during this question session with Teva will be answered online on the Blue Trails Guide blog by next Tuesday, November 1st. So Teva, the last question that we have is sort of a second half to the question before, but is what were some of the challenges that you faced while pulling together some of these public engagement workshops and design sessions and things like that, and how did you work to overcome them?
Well, I think a common struggle for a lot of planning agencies is making sure they're getting input from a wide variety of stakeholders. And we know that our rivers are used by a lot of immigrant communities for sustenance, for fishing. And we also know that sometimes they're not being used recreationally because they don't know how to paddle. They don't have access to those sort of resources. And so I think making sure those folks who are not kind of currently plugged into existing networks, like for looking, through recreational groups or through business community, how to really do outreach to more low-income communities and non-English speaking communities was a huge challenge for us, because we know that they're there and utilizing these rivers, but just not in the organized way that we're able to kind of more efficiently plug into. We did try and do some actual outreach, to folks along the river, but we probably would have been better off had we had one of them kind of, we had translators with us, but again, that's really just hit or miss on finding the right day with the right number of anglers that are out there. And then we did try and work through some existing community housing areas that tend to serve low-income folks, but again, it was hit or miss on finding people that had an interest in rivers, and some of this just feels so big and theoretical that it was difficult to kind of figure out how to have a conversation about the potential of these water trails. So we do know we need to make sure that that's something we're keeping in mind as we move forward with further development.
Great, thank you, Teva. Well, that wraps up perfectly, right at 11:30 Mountain Time. So I want to thank you all for joining us today for our October webinar. And Teva, thank you so much for the really insightful information that you gave about the planning tools to help create a water trails plan for the greater Des Moines area. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar will be recorded, or is recorded, and will be available by next Tuesday, November 1st, on our Blue Trails Guide blog. I will also be sending out a link to all participants and registrants as a part of this conference. So thank you so much for joining us this month. I invite you to join us next month in November to talk more about how to work with agricultural landowners to improve water quality for both river habitat and recreation. So thank you guys again. Thank you, Teva, and have a great rest of your October, and we'll see you back in November.
Thanks.